It's their second meeting this year, this time in Russia. What are the highlights from the talks between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin? Ushering in a new era as China and Russia celebrate the 70th anniversary of diplomatic ties, how will the two countries map out their future? Dubbed the Russian Davos, the St. Petersburg Economic Forum this year focuses on the theme of creating a sustainable development agenda. But how will its motto relate to global economic uncertainties? And how should China and Russia jointly cope with the common challenges of growing protectionism, as well as safeguarding global and regional stability?
During Chinese President Xi Jinping's state visit to Russia earlier this week, China and Russia agreed to upgrade their relationships to what is being called a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for a new era. This was followed by the 23rd St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, where President Xi spoke. So what does a healthy China-Russia relationship mean for the two countries, for the region, and globally? How should we view the previous 70 years of China and Russia's ongoing partnership, and what are the challenges that these two countries are facing together in this era? Today, I'm very glad to be joined in the studio by Su Ge, Chairman of the China-Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, and Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department for European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. We shall also speak to Russian defense analyst Pavel Fagonhar in Moscow via satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our discussion here. Ambassador Su Ge, first of all, let's take a closer look at the implications of the new label wording, like comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for a new era.
Well, I think this it shows that this is a very important relationship in the world. Every word in the phrase counts. For instance, the first one, new era. This word has been added to this phrase thus very recently, because it signifies that the relationship, although it has a standing, has a history, now the relationship enters into this new era against the changing international backdrop and owing to the enhancing closeness of the bilateral national interests and so forth. And also there is a key word in it, that it's not just a relationship of cooperation. It's a relationship which can be coordinated. That shows that these two countries have a similar or same or like-minded views towards international and regional issues. It shows that these two countries, which are both members of the United Nations Security Council, if these two, and also two of the largest countries, among the largest countries in the world, and these two come and issue any statements, they are going to create an impact. They are going to generate an impact on a continuation of world peace, stability, and development.
These years, to my knowledge, senior diplomats and policymakers in Beijing have emphasized over and over the importance of setting a very good example in the case of a China-Russia relationship in, for example, democratizing the new international relationship or world politics. I'd like to know more about why we want to further democratize the international relationship. Is it actually referring to the unipolar world dominated by the United States since the end of the Cold War?
Sure. I think if we look at this history of Chinese foreign policy, I think several years ago the democratization of the international order would be very, very important judgment from Chinese side. Because according to Chinese understanding, I think that the previous international order used to be dominated by some superpowers. And now I think it's a time, especially with the background of the globalization economically. So it provides a very, very strong basis for the dynamic, for more democraticalization of the international order. I think it's a logic behind these words. Of course, I think in practice that China, Russia, and some other, countries, especially emerging economies, emerging powers, there will be a new part of the leadership in the global governance and some other issues. So I think it gives a very important judgment, say that there will be a decentralization trend in international order, which means that maybe China and Russia's cooperation will not aim at oppose some country like United States, and China, Russia, and some other cooperation with other countries just in the trend, a general trend, to push forward this kind of democratization of international order.
Thank you so much. Let me cross over to Mr. Pavel Fagohor, who's standing by in Moscow. Hello, Pavel. The question is, yes, Russia is one of the P5, and it has a formidable nuclear arsenal. But other than this, China is many times the size of the Russian economy. So what can we do together to help stabilize a global order, the world order, international politics, which is increasingly characterized by the American-led unilateralism?
Russia and China have right now a lot of coinciding interests. So of course each nation has its own national interest, but they increasingly coincide, and this has led to an increasingly close partnership and cooperation agreement, kind of de facto agreement. It's not, of course, an alliance, but it's notching towards that direction. And it's not only just that interests have coincided increasingly, it's also because the American pressure on both nations is also increasing and pushing the two, China and Russia, closer and closer together. Of course, the Chinese economy is much bigger than the Russian economy, but politically and militarily, these are two great powers with comparable capabilities, and of course also economically there's a lot of cooperation because Russia is producing commodities in the large and has some actual still has important technologies in military matters and space and things like that. So and China's the trade is growing, so it's a political, economic and military, I would say, marriage, a kind of a relationship, which is becoming closer and closer as the world becomes more and more dangerous.
Pavel, let me take a quick look at the 70 years anniversary of the bilateral relationship. I believe this relationship, which lasted for 70 years, also includes the Soviet era. Now, it is during the period of eastward expansion of the NATO in the early 1990s that both sides, Russian Federation and Beijing, decided to initiate what is called the Special Strategic Partnership facing the 21st century since the years of Boris Yeltsin, late president of the Russian Federation. What does that mean today for the 21st century when trade war has actually broken out between the two biggest economies? Is that a strategic opportunity for Russia to rise globally, making use of resources on both sides?
Well, the Soviet Union apparently was one of the first to recognize the People's Republic, and they were allies for some time. Then they were adversaries, and then China in the 80s was in partnership with the United States. And now it's all changed back again, and the countries are, Russia and China are again together. Since the 90s, it has been a long road to the present very close relationship. It was there were tensions, and the Russian military believed that in the Chinese threat, maybe the Russian military was the last very serious kind of strata in Russia and Moscow that warmed up to China and understood that China is a close partner and that the main adversary is otherwise it's in the West, and it's primarily the United States. And so and of course there's also the very important relationship and partnership in fighting Islamic terrorism, though right now most likely it still is very important, but it's maybe not as important as resisting American pressure, which the United States believes it has the right and the capability to change Chinese policies and to change Russian policies by pressure and by offering deals. So that's, and so Russia and China are kind of in this together very much.
Thank you very much. Let's look at the renowned phrase of a non-aligned national relationship, 结伴不结盟, between the two countries, Moscow and Beijing. The United States, for whatever advantages it possesses so far in comprehensively constraining and containing the rise of China, it has many military blocs. Other than the transatlantic relationship, despite the controversy surrounding spending shares of member states and NATO, they have also the Japan-US Security Pact in Northeast Asia, so on and so forth. 5 treaty alliance with neighboring countries in the Indo-Pacific region. China doesn't have any military ally, yet we have emphasized over and over that our relationship with Russia is not a military alliance. So, Mr. Cui, is it our vulnerability or rather our advantage in maneuvering, I mean the strategic maneuvers between Moscow and Beijing?
I think firstly, this policy or the principle for Chinese foreign policy to have more partners but without any alliance with other countries. I think the major reason is also in the Chinese foreign policy has been insisting its principle to keep an independent policy. So which means that China could not, I mean, take some prize to be part of any alliance. And secondly, I think it's a very, very rational consideration from China, which means that once China will get any allies with any countries, maybe there will be some negative impact on the balance of the global strategy. For example, once China and Russia get a kind of alliance, certainly they will give a very, very big stimulation to other countries to find out the chance to have some more alliance, and which will, I mean, push forward this trend, have some more confrontation between different alliances. So I think it's a very, it's a very good consideration.
Obviously, President Trump pursues a zero-sum game in restricting the rise of China with, as I said earlier, so many military blocs. Ambassador Su, why does China still refuse to forge any military alliance? Don't you think this will expose the vulnerability of our defense capability?
So you have asked a set of very good questions. Some involve the history of the 3 countries, United States, China, and Russia.
During the Cold War years.
Yeah, during the Cold War years. That reminds me of a very famous Chinese novel called The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, 三国演义. Well, it shows that all these 3 countries, we learn things from the past. We draw historical lessons, because as Professor Cui just said, that well, there had been a period in which China aligned itself with the Soviet Union, then vis-a-vis the United States. Then back in the 60s and 70s, China and shifted its policies, and the United States and China became close, and then in order to fend off a third party, which was the Soviet Union, which was regarded as the adversary. So when we look at the foreign policies of any given era, we need to draw lessons from the past. Now when we look at the present day situation, great things are taking great changes are taking place. As you mentioned, that the general trend is peace, this development. Yet there are forces coming up, challenging globalization, challenging multilateralism, and so on. However, I would like to say that when you look at United States behavior, and then when you look at the policies made by the leaders of both Russia and China, I can see that the relationship between Russia and China is getting more and more mature, because it's a relationship. You can see that both sides emphasize that this is a relationship which is non-confrontational, it's a non-alignment, it's not directed against any third party. That shows that this relationship to generate more positive input on international relations. So I think that's very positive.
There's indeed a lot of implications for us to look at, considering the independence of China's foreign policy. You're watching Dialogue with Mr. Shuge, Mr. Cui Hongjian, and Mr. Pavel Fagerholm. We're discussing implications of the joint commemoration of the 70th anniversary of a Russia-China relationship when President Xi Jinping and his Russian counterpart were holding talks about how to upgrade the strategic partnership facing the new era. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Fareed Zakaria, the CNN commentator, calls the current era a post-American era, and he's the author of a book, In the Post-US Era, The Rise of the West. I've read this book a few times. The book indicates that the U.S. is trying to unilaterally rewrite the world order, expecting to overthrow the multilateralism created under the Yalta Agreement. As the two important geopowers on the Euro-Asian continent, how will China and the Russia participate in the construction of a new world order? I'd like to go back to Pavel.
The United States today is, as quite often before, is basically trying to keep the status quo. Because the status quo, as it was after the end of the Cold War, was a world dominated by the United States. But they're finding it increasingly hard economically and politically to do that. And the current world tension is actually a result of the world getting out of the American control increasingly. And that's a very serious problem. It's the standoff between economic standoff and the tariff war between Beijing and Washington is, of course, it's just part of the picture. And there's this, the military standoffs in the South China Sea and in the Straits of Taiwan. And Russia and the United States have standoffs in Syria and the Baltic and the Black Sea and then Venezuela, and a number of places in the world where these potential standoffs are happening is increasing, which makes this world a very, very dangerous place, because these standoffs could lead to actual skirmishes or clashes, and clashes could escalate. And to form a new kind of backbone, a new structural part that would make this world a safer place than it is today, would require a serious realignment of world power to take into account the growing role, economic and political, of China, and the discontent over American policy in Europe, which is also very seriously growing. This is and to get there, to that new world of stability, a lot should be done, and Russia and China would be, of course, their very close relationship is a very stabilizing factor in trying to establish a new but very stable and just a world order.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to the Beijing studio. Mr. Cui, of course, the personal warm chemistry between Putin and Mr. Xi Jinping could be highlighted by exchange of medals, a symbol of the highest honors in both cases. Having said this, the two countries were former adversaries during the Cold War. Is it an easy job for the two governments to quickly resume mutual trust on issues like flashpoints from DPRK, Syria to Venezuela?
Indeed, we can find out from the history of the bilateral relations between China and Russia. Indeed, Yes, now we are in a very good relations, but I don't think it's an easy one. Not only, I think, for those two big countries and the biggest, neighbors with each other, we need to have some more and more exchange and also dialogue, just like what happened between President Xi and President Putin. How many times they meet with each other already? So I think it also gives a very useful experience for the other countries how to develop these special and also important relations. Regarding to some issues now, especially some pressing issues for both two leaders, I think firstly to keep the stability and also more credible process for the nuclear issue and disarmament issue. Very important.
You put your finger on a very important issue, that the U.S. unilateral decision to withdraw from the intermediate range nuclear forces treaty, a hallmark of the Cold War. Now, Ambassador Su, is it why did Chancellor Angela Merkel call for China to join the nuclear disarmament when she spoke of the issue of the intermediate range nuclear forces treaty?
Well, as you can see that the world, the general trend is toward peace and stability, development and cooperation. However, we can see that there are forces which stand in a way or lingering and which do not wish to move out of the historical scene. That being said, I would say that the missile the pact was an important, what I would say, a milestone, and which in history. Anything and anybody who wants to go back, and people have to question about the intentions. For instance, in the United States, there is people know that there is this group called military-industrial complex. They would like to see tension in the parts of the world so that they can enhance their military buildup. So by pulling out of this track, some people would feel that their hands would be freed, and so that they can deploy this short range the missiles. That being said, there was a quick follow-up to your last question. That is, big countries do have national interests, but the most important thing is to find a convergence of national interests.
I'm wondering if there is anything like convergence between the United States and China at this defining moment of trade disputes. Well, ahead of the G20 summit in Japan, President Trump must be anxiously looking for a win in the trade deals. He said over and over that China really wants to make a deal. He is also in the mood of reaching an agreement before the next election, so that Republicans could be rallied behind him in their crusade against Democrats to win the next election. What do you think of the possibility that our impact of the joint commemoration of the 70th anniversary in Moscow would deliver a strong, powerful message to President Trump? Hey, this is something you need to take a second look, and we are doing something to really balance in the unilateral and the unipolar world.
Certainly, now the counter situation is to take a consideration of its domestic politics. Now, President Trump tried to win something from G20 in Japan, and I think now there will be some gaming, between China and the U.S. on this issue. If we take account of the recent, fighting between two countries on so-called WTO reform issue, and how could China change its status as a developing country, some other. I think this message delivered from the common stand by China and Russia will give the G20 a clear, signal that China and Russia, both of two countries, are the important member of G20. They will share the same understanding and the same, task in the issue of the reforming WTO or some other. But of course, at the same time, if we look at the American side, also United States is trying to find out more, allies on this issue, including Japan and some European countries. So I think Certainly, now it gives a very, very practical, background for this visit by Mr. Xi to Moscow to look for some more coordination and collaboration with the Chinese partner on this issue.
Ambassador Su, where do you exactly stand on the issue of China's pivotal role in joining hands with Russia to navigate the course of, say, independent development and maintaining peace together on the platform of G20, SCO, BRICS? These are the blocks and platforms that President Putin and Mr. Xi Jinping spoke of. Do you think China, whose economic might is more than the total combined by all others in the BRICS bloc, but maybe Western observers say Russia's strength has been exaggerated a little bit?
Well, just depending on where and through which the lenses you are going to look at this. Well, I think that just now your earlier question contained a very important concept. That is, as is stated in the joint declaration by both leaders, both China and Russia, these two responsible international powers, they are going to exert very important influence onto the world stage so as to help maintain equilibrium in international arena. So that means that both Russia and China, they are going to make contribution to facilitate peace, stability, cooperation in the world. For instance, this upcoming G20, both probably, I would think that both are going to promote, issue statements in the promotion of the continuation of globalization. Probably both are opposed to the continuation exercise of unilateralism so far as economics is concerned. So both are opposed to the Cold War mentalities. Both are for cooperative coordination in international relations, democratization in international relations. So I would think that if you, from this stand, if somebody would belittle Russian influence, I don't think they are. They are right. The China and Russia stay close together. They are not forming a new alliance as some countries did in the Cold War, but they are making positive contribution to the world.
Thank you so much. That's the end of this edition of Dialogue on the global impact of having a very special strategic partnership facing the new era in coordination between Moscow and Beijing. I'll see you next time.